Shalom, guys. Welcome back to another episode here at YASHAV Ministries with Casa de Israel Yara. Thank you again for being here. Again, if you have the content that we have on our channel, please like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please put them on the comment section down below. Also, if you have any youth, anybody who's willing to listen, is interested in spending some time with us and studying the truth of the word of Elohim, his heart and his foundation, right? For his essence, right? They're willing to look into God's heart with us, share, and let's together dwell and get to know Elohim, right? And so this week's Torah portion is Chayei Sarah, right? And so in the Hebrew it says Chayei Sarah, right? And so this portion starts off at Genesis 23 from 1 through 25:18, right? The Haftarah, or the prophet portion, is 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 1 through 31, and the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament portion, is Hebrews 11 through 16, or 1 Corinthians 15 50 through 27, right? But before we get to the study of the Torah and the reading, let's bless the Torah, give it his honor and his reverence, right? We don't worship the scroll, right? We honor it because it's God's word, it's God's heart, and we're blessed and privileged to be able to have it and to be able to study it, read it, so that way we can get to know the creator of everything and the foundation of the earth. So it says, "Blessed are you, our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to study the words of the Torah. Please, Adonai, our Elohim, that the words of your Torah are pleasant to our mouth and the mouth of your people, the house of Israel, and that we and our children and the children of our house of Israel know your name and become students of your Torah for its essence. Blessed are you, Elohim, King of the universe, who has chosen us from all the nation and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah." So Abraham, on this week's Torah portion, mourns Sarah, and then he goes to find her a proper burial, right? Genesis 23 verse 3 through 4 say the following: "Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites, and he said, I am a foreigner, a stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury the dead," right? And so this is a depiction of the location of the site and the area that Abraham is trying to buy, and is in the land of Canaan, right? And so where is Hebron, right? And so we're going to see in this Torah portion that Abraham, in his attempt to bury his wife, right, give her an honorable burial, right? Here in this opening verses, we understand that Abraham mourns her, gets up, and goes to the Hittite leader in the land of Canaan and asks if he can buy a burial site for his wife to bury the dead, right, or his dead. And so here from Genesis, right, when I just read from Genesis 1, it says, "Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiryat Arba." This is in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. "And Abraham went to mourn Sarah and wept over her. Then Abraham rose beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites and said, I'm a foreigner, stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead." The Hittites replied to Abraham, "Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choice of your tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead." Right? Now, interesting enough, here it says that Abraham was considered a prince, right? And so, following the line that we have established, right, with creation, the fall of man, right, the men's of God and the men's of men, right, the Noah, right, the destruction, the flood, right. Again, we established that there was a disbalance spiritually and morally in men, right? Some men were inclined to honor God, and some men were inclined to disobey and follow their own hearts and their own thoughts. And so here, Abraham is in the land of Canaan, right? And so Abraham, we found out last week, and we understood last week, that he was given a blessing, and he was given the test, right? He was tested. He was found just and righteous in Elohim's eyes, right? And Elohim considered Abraham in his plans, and he gave Abraham an opportunity to see what Elohim was going to do, and he tested his judgment last week, as we saw how Abraham interceded for Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Obviously, Sodom and Gomorrah, the people in the land were so corrupt and gone astray that they had decided to follow on their footsteps of evil, and so Elohim had to destroy, and he saved Lot, right, because of Abraham. But at the end of the day, Abraham was found just, and we see here that he was respected, right? He was considered a prince. So Abraham, after Sarah passes away, right, it's believed that Sarah passes away, right? The rabbinical literature or scriptures say that Sarah had passed away after Abraham took Isaac into to be sacrificed, right? And so she had passed away because she couldn't handle the thought of Isaac being sacrificed. And then it says also that when they came back from the mountain, she had passed away. Now, these are details that are not explicitly talked about in the portion. But what is interesting is that Abraham gets up and goes to negotiate with the Hittites, right, in the land of Canaan, right? And it's understood that Abraham was supposed to be heir of the land, right? He was given the land. And so here it says the terminology in this chapter identifies these people as the sons of Het, right? So these are the Hittites, right? So they are the leaders in the land of Canaan, where Abraham is supposed to be the heir of that land, right? Because Elohim gave him a land grant covenant, right? Meaning that he gifted Abraham the land. He said that land was going to be his. But in this time and place, and in this moment, there were other people in the land of Canaan that were leaders and that ran and owned the land. And so the land was dedicated to many gods. And so it says here that throughout, except for the Gentilic, the Hittite, right, in chapter 23, verse 10, and in chapter 10, verse 15, Het is listed as son of Canaan among largely Semitic people. Outside of the Bible, the most well-known Hittites were Indo-European people who inhabited central Anatolia in the middle of the second millennium BC. After the collapse of the empire around 12,000 BC, remnants of the civilization preserved in northern Syria, right? The term Hittites for the Anatolian people derives from their association with the land of Hatti. Now, not only in their own texts, but also in Ugarit, right? There's another land and people. Egyptian and Akkadian texts, the Indo-European Hittite-speaking Nazites gained prominence over the original Hittian inhabitants beginning about 2000 BC. The Old Testament, right, probably makes no reference to the Nizite Hittites of the Empire Age. The term with the vowel designation Ephron and his king is used in no other designations of any of the Anatolian peoples, right? The Anatolian people referred to as Hittites should more precisely be referred to as Haitians or Nazites, referring to the land and language respectively. This should not be confused with the Semitic Hittites of Genesis. So here is explaining who were the Hittites and the comparisons of the time, right? Historical findings and literature that might assimilate or connect with the Torah or the Bible, right? It says here, property of burial. Now we're going to get into the reason why Abraham is negotiating the burial site. It says negotiations here are not concerned with the rights to dig a hole, right? Mark a grave, contemporary burial practices favor rock cut or cave tombs, right? So they were not arguing about digging a hole in the land, right, and burying Sarah, because they already have they already had their ways of burial, meaning they had tombs, they had rock cut caves, and they really weren't negotiating so much the ground itself, which were meant to accommodate the clan through generations. Bodies would be laid out on rock shelves until nothing remained but the bones. At which point the bones could either be cleared to the back of the tomb or relocated into the container of some sort to make room for another body. The use of family tombs may partially explain the use of the phrase gather to his people. The deceased ancestors were honored through a variety of practices that did not stop after burial. These practices made desirable for tombs to be a proximity to somewhat permanent settlements, right? So Abraham understood that he was going to be blessed with this land, right? And so in comes a negotiation in what, even though the land was given to him already by the word of Elohim, he, in his essence, by faith, he had to act on that promise, right? Right. So Elohim told him this is going to be your land, and Abraham didn't stay there waiting, for millions of years to pass so that he can, inherit the land. He went and started little by little earning that land, right? And buying it back, right? And so here we see him negotiate because he wants a piece of the land that will be his to bury his wife. And so we're going to understand more as we go along why he's trying to buy a piece of land. So it says, Abraham negotiates for a long term. If he had been willing to accept the land on a grant basis, the land could have been reclaimed in later generations or in hard times. In contrast, Abraham wants to acquire an inherited state. Now, here it is explaining to us a little bit about what Abraham is trying to do, right? So Abraham doesn't want to have a portion of the land because, as when we read, it says here in verse Verse 7 says, Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. Now, here we see, again, Abraham bowing down, and that is not in a form of worship, is a form of respect and giving the Hittite leader a respect of the land that he's in because he is a leader. And he said to them, If you're willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with an Ephron, son of Sohar, on my behalf. So he will sell me the Cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him. Right? So now he's saying, I want a specific cave in a specific piece of land, and I want you as the leader to talk to the owner of that piece of land and ask him on my behalf if he can, sell me the land. And so it says, and is at the end of the field. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you. Now Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. Now, again, the essence of the people being at the gate to the city comes back, right? Abraham was at the entrance of his tent. Lot was at the gate of his city. And so we understand that in the gates of the city, it was a commercial area where business and rulings and judges will be sitting, right? And so it makes sense now that understanding that historical context, we understand why they're in the doors of the city, right? It says, Now, my Lord, he said, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people, and bury your dead. And again, Abraham bowed down, right? And again, Abraham, it is humility, right? Remember, Abraham is giving us the blueprint of service, giving us the blueprint of how to dialogue and negotiate and interact with these leaders, right, that have proclaimed themselves leaders on earth. Obviously, ultimately, Abraham knows who is the leader and the creator of heaven and earth. And he knows that this land is given to him and he is the rightful owner of this. But he still renders respect to those leaders in that moment in time because he is doing a negotiation and he is giving them honor so that they can see the favor in their eyes and understand, okay, this man is just. right? They can't find nothing negative to say about Abraham because the way that he's doing business with them is straightforward, okay? So he says, and he said to Ephron, listen to me, if you will. I will pay the price of the field. Accept it from me so I can bury my dead there. Right? It says, Ephron answered Abraham and said, listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is this between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham agreed to Ephron's term and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites. 400 shekels of silver according to the weight current among the merchants. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field was deeded to Abraham and his property in the presence of all Hittites who had come to get the gate of the city. Afterwards, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is at Hebron in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as his burial site. So interesting enough, the Hittite leader, right, and the landowner Ephron, is trying to gift it to Abraham and tell him, listen, it's on me, I give it to you. And Abraham doesn't want that transaction, right? And it's understood that, especially in the Hittite code, there is a code of the land, is a code that we'll be reading right now. So there is a code, right, in the Hittite law, right, that is not studied, right, very, very often, right, and here we see the essence of Abraham's smarts and faithfulness to Elohim, right? It says Genesis 23 has not received the necessary attention from the point of view understanding the underlying Hittite legal problems with which Abraham was concerned. The reason for this may be found partially with the fact that critical studies of the chapter have felt that the term Benecheth of the text does not refer to the ethnic Hittites, but it is a general designation of the pre-Israelite inhabitants. While the historic connection between the northern Hittites and the natives of Hebron remains problematic, the conventional analysis of Abraham's negotiation emphasizes the cunning of Ephron and his truly wrestling of huge price for Abraham by pretending false generosity, right? So he is explaining that even though there is a controversial point in whether the Hittites in the Genesis story or narrative are the same ones as the historical ones, it is understood that the negotiation and the laws of the land bring a very interesting point between Abraham and Ephron, because it shows that Ephron was giving or pretending generosity, right? He says, no, my lord, my prince, I'll give you the land. Don't worry, it's on me. What is 400, silver shekels, between me and you, right? And again, Abraham says, I'll take that deal, right? And says, according to this interpretation, the trading center around the price only. In the following sequence, Abraham, as a sojourner, had to ask the entire town council for permission, right? So now we see that in the entrance of the land, there was judges and there was a council where he was presenting his case to acquire permanent tenure and property suitable for a burial site, right? The request was at first rejected, or at least circumvented as the first reply. Merely offer the use of some property, perhaps under lease without permanent title, right? So here's explaining the way that the sequence happened. And when Abraham renewed his request for an outright purchase of a cave owned by Ephron, the later capitalizing upon Abraham's anxiety, right? So Ephron sees that, Abraham is being consistent. He's being persistent. He wants his cave because he has his wife and he wants to give her proper burial. Right? It says, in the fact, Abraham did repeat and offer a money payment, which could leave no doubt that he would pay almost any price. At this point, Ephron skillfully mentioned the price, 400 shekels, which Abraham was forced to accept without further bargaining, and which was promptly weighed out of the vendor. Right? Foreign interpretation resets on the presumption that the root stands for giving a gift, even though the same root in 13 must stand for pay, right? However, we study the Hittite laws involved in this transaction. We discover a wholly different controversy between the two men, right? The Hittite code found in Bokhazkoi in Asia Minor among the ruins of Hattusas, right? All these names are very hard to pronounce. Flourished as a capital in the Hittite Empire from 1800 to the 1200 BCE. And it contains 200 known paragraphs, of which paragraphs 43, 47, and 48 and 169 contain real estate laws. Right? So this document that I'm showing you guys is a little, it's a little detailed, and probably you're not being able to read it as much, but it is information, historical facts, and important points to understand the reason why Abraham is doing this negotiation in the land of Canaan where he was promised, right? Abraham is doing something very legally and direct. He's not going into the land saying, I'm the chosen one by God. I was given a promise, give me the land. He's understanding that there's a structure and laws, and for him to do the things correctly and find, grace in man's eyes, he has to do righteous business and be honorable and be willing to pay the price, as long as he doesn't have to do what we're about to read. So it says here, right? So Code 46, 46 and 47 say the following. If a village, anyone holds fields under sockage as inheritance, if the fields have all been given to him, he shall render the services. If the fields have been given to him only to a small part, he shall not render the services. They shall render them from his father's house. Right? Later versions, right, say, if anyone buys all the fields of a craftsman, they shall ask the king, and he shall render those services which the king orders. If there remains the field in the hands of the man from whom he buys, he shall not render the services. Right? The Hittite code thus rule that the obligation to perform ilku, right? Ilku is a feudal service arising from land ownership, right? So it's a service that was given to the king and to the leaders of the land, right? It says ilku services was conferred upon the buyer only when all the seller's property passed into the possession of a new owner, right? These laws apply to inheritance and purchase alike. The status mentioned find complete applications in Genesis 23. On closer examination, the biblical account, an often overlooked aspect, emerges. In Abraham's second request, he explicitly asks for only his cave of Machpelah, which is at the edge of the field, right? It is here suggested that Abraham, mindful of the heavy consequences of acquiring an entire field, requested only that part of Ephron's property for which he had actually used. The purchase of part of the field did not subject the buyer to any obligations of service to the king. Evidently, all of Ephron's holdings were here involved in paragraph 47 of the Hittite code. Is therefore fully applicable. Ephron, on the other hand, saw a chance of righting himself and entirely of the ilku services, right? So Ephron here, as he was giving Abraham a false generosity, he was trying to relieve himself from the responsibility of paying the tributes to the king, right, or the leader of the land in that moment, right? It says here, therefore promptly replied, I sell you the field and I sell you the cave which is in it, right? He refused to divide his property and gave Abraham the alternative of purchasing the entire field or no part of it at all, so that Abraham will become the feudatory for the entire field with a complete purchase. Abraham's answer in verse 13, an almost desperate ascension to Ephron's ultimatum, could be translated freely. If you would only listen, however, I will pay the price for the entire field. Take it from me. In the light of this legal interpretation, the argument of the two men thus did not revolve around the attempt to extract an excessive price, nor did Ephron ever make a false tender of a free gift. to entice Abraham, right? It rather concerned the question of who will render the services due. The king, as a result of principal ownership of the land. The reasons for Abraham's unwillingness to assume the iliku obligations can only be conjecture, since we do not know exactly what the services was. The religious trapping connected with it, as reflected in paragraph 47 and 169, as well as the well-attested Hittite cultic ceremonial connection with the dedication of the fields, may have been important factors. Nevertheless, the biblical account shows that the passing of the title was consummated in a strictly commercial manner, free of these trappings. Ownership was evidently transferred by payment of the purchase money. The comparable technical terms, right? So here we start understanding that Abraham wanted to buy a piece of the land, and then he was giving the whole piece of the land where the cave was. He bought it with the trees in it, right? And it's very important because understand that these leaders, right, the Hittite leaders, that they dedicated this land to their gods, right? And so because they dedicated this land to their gods, right, always remember that the kings represented the gods, right? So the kings were messengers of God, right? They were the image of God. And so because the land was dedicated to their gods, and the kings were the leaders of the land, and they represented God, and they were the image of God, then you had to pay tribute to those kings, right? If you owned the land, and if you were an owner of the land in which this king was a leader of. Okay, and you also had a part of a responsibility of military duty, meaning that you will have to serve this king in military combat. And so Abraham is in the middle of his mourning and negotiation to bury his wife. He's keeping in mind that he has to buy this land as legally as possible, but relieve himself from any duty to any god or king that is not Elohim, right? So this is why there is a negotiation of the land. This is why Abraham does this commerce and does this buy in a public manner, and he does it in the doors of the city, because he wants to have witnesses to see that he bought this land, and he's not held to worship, to tribute to other gods. Okay, now with that being said, right, we're going to look at one more point of this treaty, which is very interesting. Right, so the trees, right, it says here that additional evidence for the Hittite legal background of our account is the prominent mention made of trees on the purchased property. Right, verse 17, and all the trees which were on the field along its entire borderline. Right, as is well known, a characteristic trait in Hittite business document is the consistent listing of exact number of trees at each real estate sale. Right? Verse 17 makes it virtually certain that actual legal act, written or unwritten, between Abraham and Ephron made specific mention of the exact number of trees on the property. We have thus found that Genesis 23 is a permeate with intimate knowledge of intricate subtitles of Hittite laws and customs, correctly corresponding to the time of Abraham, and fitting in with the Hittite features of biblical account. With the final destruction of the Hittite capital of Hattusa about 12,000 BCE, these laws must have fallen into utter oblivion. This is another instance in which a late dating must be firmly rejected. Our studies again confirms the authenticity of the background material of the Old Testament, in which it makes such an invaluable source for the study of all aspects of socioeconomic and legal aspects of the period's history, and it depicts. We understand that in the elements of chapter 25, we see that Abraham, in his negotiation, is partially understanding that he has to buy this land, right, that he was given to him, but he has to do the legal term, because he has a vision. He understands that this land will be his, and so he buys that piece of land, buries his wife, and it's understood that all three patriarchs, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were buried in the same cave in the land which Abraham bought, right? And this land was bought and was then understood that it was the blessing that Elohim gave Abraham, right? Which is rightfully Abraham's because Elohim gave it to him, all right? So it's the inheritance of the generations and the nations that will come through Abraham, right? Abraham will be blessed, or Abraham will bless all the nations, right? Through him, all the nations will be blessed, right? That's what the blessing says. And so this land that Abraham is buying, right, the land of Canaan, right, eventually becomes, Israel and Jerusalem, right? And this land that is given to Abraham, in which everybody's going to be blessed, we pay attention in the beginning. It says that Abraham, when he came into the land, he says, I'm a foreigner, I'm a stranger among you, right? And so Abraham, in his essence, right, just like we are, was entering this land and starting to fulfill his purpose and his mission, right, in acquiring this land, right, for the next generation. Abraham understood the future, right, of our faith, right. Abraham believed that he will buy this land, he will buy this cave, he will put his wife there, and he will be buried there, his sons will be buried there, and eventually many descendants will be buried here. And in faith, they will inherit that land, and in faith, they will resurrect in the future, right? Now, did they believe? Did they think that there was a resurrection? I don't know. But they have faith, and they understood that this land was going to be given to them, right? And so Abraham was fulfilling that purpose. But with all this said and done, right? With all this said and done, what can we learn from this Torah portion? How did Abraham treat the ruling Canaanite, right? Or the Hittite? Did he treat him with impudence and arrogance? Or he treated it with honor and respect? How does Scripture enjoin us to treat human authorities? Can we respect their positions of authority without flattering them or condoning their wickedness? Pondering the demeanor of other biblical passages or personages in their dealings with earthly pagan authorities like Moses, Nehemiah, Daniel, Joshua, and Paul, for example. All these leaders are founded in the faith of Abraham, right? Abraham honored those leaders, right? Abraham showed the character again, right? Abraham bowed not in worship, in respect and reverence. He demonstrates us that service and carrying yourself with honor and respect and treating others the same way goes a long way in what they see. Remember, people are looking at you, right? You are a representation of God, right? I've said it many times, right? Ancient Near Eastern people created images to represent their God, and they will worship these images. Elohim is telling you that you are his image, and people will not worship you. But through you, many people can be blessed. Through you, people can see Elohim. Abraham again teaches us that even though he knew that that land was his because it was given to him by Elohim through his word, because it was his blessing, he didn't go in there with arrogance. He went in there with honor and respect and gave the leaders of that land in that moment the respect they deserved, and he negotiated his part, and he didn't sell himself short, or he didn't give himself. He said, I will pay my dues, and I will pay what I have to pay, and I will buy this land legally, and I won't have to worship other gods or pay tributes to those gods because I want that piece of land to bury my wife, right, and bury my family. So what we conclude with this Torah portion, we're going to go back to, our mother and matriarch, Sarah. Right, Hebrews 11, verse 11 through 16 say the following. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. So from this one man, and he, as a good as dead came descendants, and as numerous of the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand of the seashore. And all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, Elohim is not ashamed to be called their Elohim, for he has prepared a city for them. Elohim has prepared a city for you. It's not in the sky. He has prepared a city for all of us who have faith in Yeshua HaMashiach and who accept, right, the salvation by faith. We have an inheritance through Abraham, right? All the nations will be blessed through him. But we're called to obey Elohim and honor his word. We are all sojourners, we're foreigners, and we're coming to a land that is not ours, that we don't know. But Elohim says for all of us that are sojourners and foreigners, that put our faith in his son, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, the anointed one, us, he will give us a city, and where there will be his house, and we'll be able to worship him, honor him. Until then, our faith, just like Abraham, just like Sarah, is going to be prominent. And our actions and how we carry ourselves is going to dictate if we are sons of Elohim or sons of men. Actions always will speak louder than words. Let's not have religion. Let's not judge others. Let's do what we have to do so that we can represent Elohim and his kingdom in the world. Thank you for watching. Have a great week. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.